Howdy, Ags. Welcome to Aggie Growth Hacks, the podcast sponsored by the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship at Texas A&M, and we're dedicated to helping entrepreneurs improve their business, connect with other Aggie entrepreneurs, and support one another. I'm your host, Greg Martin, fighting Texas Aggie class of 2001.
And I'm your co-host, Chris Hunter, fighting Texas Aggie class of 1998. Woo!
Well, Ags, as we mentioned last week, we're visiting with George and Mike with MGV Energy Inc., the fastest Aggie-owned and operated company way back 20 years ago on the very first Aggie 100 celebration. If you haven't heard part one of this conversation, you need to just stop right now, do yourself a favor, and go back and listen to that.
So pass it back and listen up to Mike and George as they share some really good bull.
This is all really good stuff. I mean, that entrepreneurs, even starting entrepreneurs, or even I'm a 20-year plus entrepreneur, and that's the reason that I do this, is to learn from others, right? So I love that last part where he said, reserve the right to be wrong. I like that.
And I got to tell you, another Steve quote that I pay a lot of attention to is the way to be successful in business is not go out of business.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of risk management insight into that. And I think it took us a while, certainly took me a while to really appreciate how bad decisions can bankrupt you. And how do you mitigate that? How do you avoid those situations? Yeah. And I've read some books on the stuff that have really helped me and things like that. But that's again where I think we've sort of been blessed over time with good boards of directors as well that will bring up, hey, what about this? Now they leave it up to us to solve that question, but you got to make sure those questions are being asked on a regular basis.
Because I think that's the key, is because there's risks out there that will bankrupt your company that you don't even know exist. But having that, you call it board or that group of advisors, the people that you allow to speak into your business, to have that, but then also selecting, like you said, the right people. How did you guys go about finding and selecting? It's like, no, we need legal expertise, or we need the controller, the financial expertise to be able to bring that board together.
We had an older, wiser head in the form of another friend and mentor named Bob Steele. Bob had been an executive with Exxon, and then he started his own company after another good career at Canadian Hunter, another very successful company. But he had started his own company. He'd met us through the Society of Petroleum Engineers. We were on the board together, and he helped facilitate and encourage our interest in going to Canada. He was one of our promoters to go to Canada. And once we got there, Bob had a lot of connections in the financial community, the business community. I think one year, very early on, he invited George to a Christmas party of one of the big financial institutions that later backed us. But Bob took the time to introduce us to law firms and financial folks and other business leaders in town. Even before we had a formal board, we had this informal group of friends who wanted us to be successful, who were helping us, sometimes without us even knowing. Sometimes we didn't even know to ask for help, and they were just checking on us and checking in and offering some tips here and there. And even the leaders at Pan Canadian, I think once we established that relationship, they had a very robust leadership team, some very great technical people that I think also sort of took us under their wing. We actually officed in their building and had a little corner, which was very unusual to some of their employees. But their leadership team was very good at helping us get on our feet. And then once we became more independent and took on the outside financial backing, then we started having a more formal board of advisors, like you might see in a traditional company. But in the beginning, I think it was just people that encouraged us to take this risk and do it, that without us really reaching out to them, they were checking in on us and giving us some guidance.
And even when we first were thinking about doing this, we each reached out to some folks we had a lot of respect for and bounced the idea off them and just said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think about it? What questions should I be asking? All those things. And almost to a T, and as Mike said, I had a couple of really, I'll say, good professional friends They said, we think you absolutely ought to go do this. We hope you fail. And when you fail, come back and work for us. So it gave us some comfort, but it really, and you had to handle all this stuff with integrity. I think we were fortunate in many ways that we didn't get railroaded by some win-lose guy along the way. But one of the things I think it taught me in all this is I treat my professional relationships just like I treat my personal relationships, just like I treat my family relationships. There's really no difference. You need trust, you need integrity, you need honesty. And, I think it's when you treat those differently, you get in trouble. And, it's interesting. The first Christmas we were there, I'm there with 3 little kids. The guy, Terry Schmidtke, who was sort of our main point of contact for, Western Canada with Pan Canadian, he calls me up a week before Christmas and he goes, "Are you guys going back home for Christmas?" And I said, "No, man, we got these little kids and we're staying here." He goes, "Would you come to our house Christmas morning?" And so he said, "Come in your pajamas. We're going to be in our pajamas."
No.
And so we went and spent Christmas morning with him and his family. And I got to tell you, that's a different way to do business.
Yeah.
And Pan Canadian, I think the fact that we moved up there and that we did all this without having our deal signed, it almost made them compelled to make sure we didn't fail.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to give us anything for free, but they're going to make sure that the right questions are being asked and all those sort of things. So, yeah.
Well, and that's an amazing relationship to even have to begin with. I mean, then where they kind of take you under their wing and introduce you to all those folks around. I think that's amazing. And that's very Napoleon Hill type thing to have that board of advisors, even though they're not a formal board.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did y'all say, okay, we need a formal board, right? Was it 20 employees, 50 employees, something like that?
It's when we raised money, a board was imposed on us.
Okay.
Which is fine.
Well, Quicksilver, Mercury was the name of the company then, but they became a public company called Quicksilver Resources. Mm-hmm. And they were based out of Fort Worth. We had a relationship with the leadership. Mm-hmm. As a family-controlled business. And when they started backing us financially, and they were great, they believed in us. When we asked for money, they just said, "How much and when do you need it?" So that part, I think we got a little bit spoiled, frankly.
Yeah, that's wow.
They really,
y'all don't think that's what's going to happen to everybody.
Because they were generating a lot of cash in some of their production, but they didn't have new opportunities. So they saw us as their new opportunity. But with that, their board of directors and their leadership team had a very, very keen interest in what we were doing. And they did impose some discipline on us to help with some of our reporting and accounting and keeping track of things, educating them on the Canadian culture, the Canadian regulatory structure. There were some times where they wanted us to do some things that down here we could have done, no problem. But up there, it's against the law, and it's not a big deal. It's not a black, white, good, evil thing, but it's just a regulatory thing where you can't do it that way. And they get frustrated. We'd have to educate them, but it worked both ways. And because they were very aggressive and they were definitely wanting to grow and grow fast, which was aligned with us. But they had some very experienced leaders on their board that I think we certainly benefited from that oversight and that guidance because we were very relatively young and very inexperienced.
Well, when I hear that, maybe I'm reading between the lines or whatever. It is one, you're very appreciative of the structure that they put and helped you. But I'm sure back in the day, having structures, putting structure in place where it wasn't before, sometimes is growing pains.
This was not without stress. I was in a meeting. I know what you're going to talk about. Go ahead.
Well, we had one meeting. George and I had the 2 offices in the corner, and we had the door shut, and we were on the phone with our leaders in Fort Worth, and we had a vigorous dispute where I think our voices were raised, and the people outside, our secretary, others were sort of wondering what's going on in there. And at one point, I think I took my glasses off and threw them against the wall and broke them. And we left, I think, on a Friday and didn't come back until Monday and wouldn't take their calls. We had a pretty serious business and our view, an ethical issue. And it was one that almost blew us up.
And I don't know if you remember this. Part of what we also did when we started doing our retreats, one of the things Mike and I decided is we don't really want to work that hard. And so we were always from day one looking.
The fastest growing Aggie-owned company. Yeah. How'd that work out?
Yeah. But I'm telling you, one of the things we did from day one was try to find our replacements. If for no other reason, what if we get hit by a bus? Yeah. Again, this is this risk mitigation thing, right? And you got to ask those questions. We actually, right from the beginning, filed our divorce papers contractually while we're in love with each other in case the day comes where we've got to go our separate ways or something else. We had a lot of that stuff up front.
Oh, that's so
good legal advice there.
Yes. Yeah. By the way, cheap lawyers are bad. Expensive lawyers are good if you ever need to know. So don't go get a cheap lawyer. Go get the most expensive one you can find.
But we used to say at our retreats, our goal was to work ourselves out of a job. Yeah. But a big thing George mentioned is you got to always think you can't have any company be so reliant on one person that if that person were killed,
even you, even the
us.
owner.
That's right. That's not a good way to run your business. You need to have somebody that can step up.
So during that meeting where he threw stuff at the wall and we were shouting, we had just hired a guy who in theory was going to take my job. And it was his first week there. And he's got the office next to it so he can hear everything. I think it scared him to death. And then a week after that, Mike and I were both going to be gone for a week. And so this guy was going to step in as the interim president while we're gone. There were no decisions in that upcoming week whatsoever. We talked to the guys in Fort Worth. Listen, they knew this was the plan too. This was not a surprise. There should be no contentious conversations coming up, anything else. We get back, I've got a letter of resignation on my desk. Most people don't understand the stresses that come with being a president, CEO, founding a company.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing to convey to somebody while they're thinking about doing it. And I think most people, it's interesting how many students come to me that I'm going to start a business and I got 3 buddies and we're all going to quit our jobs. Then they'll call me back a month later and go, well, my buddies actually don't want to quit. And, we're thinking about getting pregnant and I really need a job and all these other things. And, it's not for everybody. It's not easy. And it's a different kind of stress entirely. And I think some people are built for it and I think some people aren't.
But it's a different type of reward too.
Oh, very.
Ironically, that same individual about 5 to 10 years later did start his own company and was very successful.
Yeah.
But a different kind of company, different kind of overlords. He really had a hard time with that board of directors.
The personalities that were just, involved.
He did something different, but it ultimately worked for him. And he's a great friend of ours, but he really couldn't handle that situation.
Then we came back and I was like, oh my gosh, what did we do? This
was supposed to be an easy week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with that. I mean, your entrepreneurship is hard, right? And you've got to have a lot of grit to work your way through a lot of things. And it sounds like you guys, so at what point, like when you won the Aggie 100, how big were y'all then?
It hit us at a perfect time. We were spending probably, it's, growth rate per year. And so a 3-year run on that, I think we were at 357% a year for 3 years. And I think the first company to exceed that was Texas Precious Metals, which they asked me to come back for, which is either the 10th or 12th. Come back and they wanted the number one to speak.
We're actually interviewing them later today too.
Okay, yeah. And I think they were the first and maybe the only company to exceed that annual return on there. It's probably at the beginning of that 3-year period, Mike, because that was in 2005. I'm going to guess we were going from something like 20 to 30 folks to 100 plus folks.
Wow.
At that time. And so this play, when we figured it out, the first thing we did was not talk about it because others own most. We knew how big the play was going to be. And it's 150 miles long by 50 miles wide. And even though Pan Canadian had a lot of acreage, everybody else had given up on this thing years ago, and we wanted to go get more land with Pan Canadian. So over a 2-year period, we were actually able to keep this quiet, even within Pan Canadian. Nobody knew about it. And we went out to land sales and joint ventured with other companies. And even with, it's kind of like the X-Files with the smoking man. Mike and I are getting invited into meetings, and we know things that are going on. And other senior managers at Pan Canadian did not like us because we'd walk into a meeting and goes, you can't be here. And we said, call so-and-so, and go, we'll go sit in the corner, and they're all mad. But it kind of had to be that way because we couldn't talk about what we had found. And that was probably the toughest part of this, was that 2-year period.
But I would think that, and maybe I don't know that world, but landmen talk to each other. I mean, so as you're snatching all this stuff up, how did y'all do that?
And I remember going into, we did a lot of joint venture deals like we had done with Pan Canadian, and we would go into these deals with the knowledge that it's going to work, but we wouldn't share that with them. So we would make very aggressive offers, like we'll drill lots of wells, we'll take 100% of the risk if you'll then allow us to earn a big hunk of your land. And they all thought we were crazy. Sure, you want to drill these wells, 100% of your money? We'll give up rights to, this is worthless anyway. Yeah. So that we took advantage of that window where nobody believed this stuff had any value. Now, once that knowledge became out there, then things changed. Yeah. But it was great. We'd go in and make these offers that I'm sure these guys are crazy. There's no way.
Money in the bank for us.
They just saw it as taking way too much risk on for something that in their view had little value. Right. And it worked out quite well for us. We doubled our land position over what we started with Pan Canadian.
And towards that end, even our initial, it was really interesting. And I'm going to give credit to Mike on this a lot. In the shallow gas stuff we were doing, we kept noticing all these little coal seams that nobody was doing anything with. So we hired a geologist and spent about a year mapping out these coal seams, this potential play. And we were just about ready to go talk to Pan Canadian about, hey, I got a new business deal. Would you guys be interested? We're at a Christmas party at this guy's house. And at the Christmas party, he goes, hey, do you guys know anything about coal bed methane?
That was at our house. That was our Christmas party. Proddy, that was
Proddy. Yeah.
That was at our house.
Do you know anything about coal bed methane? We go, well, as a matter of fact, we do. Uh-huh. And he goes, we'd like to have a meeting and get your take on it. So this is, again, ignorance is bliss.
This mature study all ready to go.
So ignorance is bliss. So we walk in with the senior management. I'll never forget this. And we asked for a joint venture that would encumber all of their rights in Alberta from Edmonton to the U.S. border. I don't know if you know anything about Alberta, but that's like and Alberta's the size of Texas. Okay. It was a 74,000 square mile joint venture. And we wanted access to their entirety of 10 million acres of land rights they had in there and everything else. And what's interesting, later they told us, which is an absurd ask. I mean, it's like going to Exxon and say, I want all your stuff in North America, and joint venture on it. But later they came back and said that's what they were lacking, that they need big. They need something material to their company. This one deal alone, if we were right, was going to double the gas reserves of their company.
Wow.
Net to them, and be very good for us as well. And so that's the other aspect of this is don't be afraid to think big.
Go big or go home.
Yeah.
That was one of our...
Now, I think now that I'm older and wiser, I'm going, my gosh, did we really ask for that? How did they not kick us out of the room, But
ignorance is bliss. What's the most they're going to do is say no?
That's right.
We didn't know any better.
Yeah.
No, that was wild.
Yeah.
We had a tendency sometimes, we'd ask for advice, but we would quite often do whatever we thought we wanted to do anyway. And I remember talking to Dick Morris, again, our mentor, professor at A&M, when we were talking about doing some of this kind of stuff. And I was down visiting, and we were having a little whiskey one night, and I was asking Dick, and, I'm sort of framing it like I'm looking for his guidance and his advice. And finally he said, Mike, why are you bother asking me? You're going to do whatever the hell you want to do anyway. But it was, we would use these guys as sounding boards, but a lot of times we'd already sort of made our mind up, but we were just looking for maybe validation or maybe some warnings. But at the end of the day, we did have a tendency to get our minds set on something. And then unless there's some compelling reason not to do it, why not? Give it a go. Mm-hmm. And because especially in the very beginning when we were thinking about this, and George and I would spend hours and hours on the phone at night. He was down here in Texas and I was up in Pennsylvania. And there's the stress of quitting your job and changing and all this. But the big thing to me was he had these little babies. Mm-hmm. And to me, I've actually felt guilty about even asking him to do this. And so it definitely had to be, well,
It worked out.
his wife was an important part of the process because without her support, there's no way this would have worked.
One of the little fun thing that happened. So shopping in Canada was different than shopping in the U.S. So we would come back together oftentimes and go to Fort Worth or wherever. But we'd end up going to some of these outlet malls and going by the Polo place together, whatever. We were shopping independently, but then we'd show up at the office back in Calgary. We're wearing the same clothes, like the exact same shirt and pants. We're like, okay, we can't be doing this anymore.
Yeah, this is weird.
Yeah.
Well, Mike and George, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the laughs. Thank you for the education. Congratulations again for the success that you've had, and really to be able to not only have success in business, but to have success in entrepreneurship. And I'm hearing that both of you continue to be very passionate about that, want to speak into advising entrepreneurs, young kids, whatever. So how can the Aggie Growth Hacks family get in touch with you? How can we reach out to you? How can we support you?
Well, we both live here in town, so we're close. And we actually were talking about this earlier. There's this Petroleum Ventures partnership between finance and petroleum engineering. I think that sounds like a fruitful source of contacts for young wannabe entrepreneurs. But for George and I mean, George is certainly a lot more engaged. He's full-time working and teaching, but I'm full-time doing nothing. So I think, opportunities to just sit down and talk with people and brainstorm, share experiences, something I would love to do. But, this, we got lots of time.
And for me, I'm happy to release my email address, or preferably I have an A&M email address.
Yeah.
That's probably a better way to go.
Sure.
My biggest challenge is time. And so there's not a lack of desire. And if people will email me, want to contact me, to the best I can, I'll make time and answer questions. I actually do a fair bit of that just because I'm teaching and people look me up, not even taking my class. One other little piece of advice I would give people about this risk mitigation, I read a book called Black Swan, not to be confused with the movie Black Swan. Very, very different. It's a book by an author named Talib, and it's about how to plan for or deal with black swan events, things that you can't predict, but are wildly material to your business or your personal life or anything else. Really helpful book in and again, how do you be successful in business? Number one, don't go out of business. And that don't go out of business thing isn't trivial, especially as a startup. Mm-hmm. But if I was going to tell somebody to go read a book, I'd have them go read that book. Mm-hmm. It was very, very interesting on that.
Well, thank y'all so much for coming on and sharing everything that y'all did here. This has been a pretty awesome episode. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, how about that, Ags? That was pure fire. I mean, I know I got a huge amount out of that interview. And like I said, in the last, episode, I took pages, plural, of notes, right? What are some of your biggest takeaways there, Greg?
It's so hard to distill all of them down. I'm going to highlight a couple of my favorites. So one, they talked about having a board of directors. Mm-hmm. And I think that really with them, because they were raising capital, that kind of got put on them, forced on them, but they really embraced it. And so even if you don't have to have a board of directors because an owner says this is how we're going to do, it's smart for entrepreneurs to develop, I call it the Fab Five. Those are those 5 people that you surround yourself with that hold you accountable, that push you towards your success, however you define it, and really don't let you, kind of take the easy way out when it gets hard. And I think that they proved out through that board of directors, finding the right people, finding the people that brings value to them, not just someone who, is a warm body in the seat. The other 2 things, I love the 2 quotes that he said. I think they said from their mentor, one of the professors, when they actually met each other, and it was hurry every chance you get. Mm-hmm. And that's different than hustle. I mean, I think a lot of times we talk about the hustle culture and just grind. That's different. When you're hurrying something, it's deliberetely moving fast to get from here to there. It's not being reckless, but it's moving with a purpose. Mm-hmm. If anybody's been in the military, I'm sure you've heard that statement a lot. Oh, yeah. But hurry every chance you get. And then I always reserve the right to get smarter. I love that. I love that
Yeah.
thought process and that caveat. What about you? Can try to distill that down to three nuggets.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got like 20 things that I starred here, and I think you stole my board of directors one because I was going to say the exact same thing. Right. and what George and Mike don't know is that they're about to be on my board of directors, my informal board of directors, because they just have so much knowledge, for business. And
they love it. I mean, they're semi-retired ags here in College Station. And they love business and they love entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I mean, it sounded like, Mike was saying he's kind of bored being retired, playing golf every day or whatever.
I can only play so much golf.
Yeah. So I got to say, I'm going to boil it down to a couple of things, right? One, they talked about go big or go home. Mike and George, as entrepreneurs, took a huge leap of faith by moving to Canada. Yeah. I mean, that was, and not only that, but George moving his family with him was just, I don't know any entrepreneurs, any of them. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs that would do that in this day and age and take their entire family, young family up to do that. But I liked how they said, well, we just figured that we could just go and get jobs again, So it was what it was.
Yeah. So until they realize they're unemployable. Once you're an entrepreneur, you're never going to go back, man.
Well, I know, right? Exactly.
But that's lies we tell ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. So I go big or go home, because they definitely went big, right? And they gave us a few stories there where they did go big, on what they were doing and when they were all in on this project, and all of a sudden it turned into this huge windfall. So that was pretty cool. I also got to say, he talked about working themselves out of a job, and that resonated with me quite a bit, because honestly, that's one of the things I've been trying to do for the past 2 to 3 years is work my way out of my day-to-day job so that I can help manage the company. And as most entrepreneurs know, that is one of the hardest things in the entire world to do, because your business completely depends on you at the very beginning. And as you hire people, you have to put systems and processes in place and train them and hold them accountable, right? So I think that's one of the biggest struggles that every entrepreneur has. And it was amazing to listen to their story on how they did that themselves. So I got to say, those were my biggest ones. Tons of other ones, but those are the big ones for me.
100%. And Ags, like we kind of alluded to or we mentioned just a little while ago, they are both local here in Bryan College Station. So if you're in the area, you're an entrepreneur, you want to connect with them, I know that they want to connect with you and to be able to kind of speak into your entrepreneurial journey. That's going to do it for this episode of Aggie Growth Hacks, and the very first of 4 in-person episodes that we recorded during Aggie 100 Day. If you're not connected with Aggie Growth Hacks on social media, on this podcast episode, if you're not subscribing, please hit subscribe. Write us a review, give us a 5-star write-up, and connect with us. We'd love to get to know you. We'd love to hear your story. We'd love to connect you with other Aggie entrepreneurs.
We also want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship at Texas A&M University. Since 1999, the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship has served as the hub of entrepreneurship for Texas A&M. If you're an Aggie entrepreneur or even a wantrepreneur, head on over to their website right now to find a program that's right for you. Just go to aggiegrowthhacks.com/McFerrin. Well, Ags, join us next time when we connect with another great Aggie entrepreneur and learn how they hack their growth. Until then, I'm Chris Hunter.
And I'm Greg Martin. Thanks and gig 'em.